Thanks for joining us once again. We wanted to do a show heading into the end of the quarter because we do a weekly show in terms of investing in Tesla, etc. And there are a few items that I wanted us to consider as we head into the production numbers at the end of the month. So this is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Thanks again for joining us. If this is your first time, welcome. If you're a repeat visitor, welcome back. This is actually going to be a fairly short show because our goal was to have a show exclusively for our, at least once a week, but at least, every couple of weeks, an exclusive show that will only go to our Patreon supporters. So, and obviously this investment component is part of it. So there are several items I wanted to review. The first is that, as you know, Sweden, and I believe Norway as well, has entered a zone where the dock workers aren't allowing Teslas to enter based on the union battle that's going on between Tesla and workers in Sweden. So I looked it up, and Sweden represents 20,000 vehicles a year of sales. And in this case, it would be sales for the last quarter. So in theory, let's say that's about, worst case scenario, it's about 5,000 vehicles that don't enter the country for sale. And I have to admit, I didn't see numbers on Norway, but we know that they've joined the strike's efforts, and you maybe have to add that in. So when you consider that they're going to do, let's say, in the neighborhood of 400,000 vehicles for the quarter, yeah, it'll affect their numbers, but, let's say 10,000 vehicles, worst case, you can see what was sold and what was not, and you can also have a proviso for, we expect to have this worked out by X, and then those vehicles can enter. So I don't think it's a monumental catastrophe because I don't think it's a permanent not being available in those countries situation. The next thing is that, primarily what we're discussing is sort of headwinds that are going on for the company. So over a couple of 3 months, because of some really good information come from different entities, I ended up really spending a lot of time studying the China situation. And it's really, really crazy. A lot of, people leaving, both expats that were working in China, as well as well-educated, well-to-do folks exiting the country as well. So we have a situation right now where when you look at the Chinese market, their middle class is the size of the population of the United States at about 350 million. So there's obviously people wealthier, and there are people that are poorer. And with a billion people, the theory was that, hey, that the Chinese middle class represents a pretty large potential customer base for Tesla and other entities. So, we haven't had any news on registrations and insurance and all that stuff, but one can expect that because of a number of headwinds in China, including floods, including the meltdown of the real estate market, and people not sure if they're going to have a job, the large exodus of expats that might also be customers. So frankly, I'm expecting at least a 10% down in terms of sales in China for Tesla, but that number could be greater, and we're actually going to find that out in a couple of weeks. So, a counterweighing to that would be the Cybertruck did get introduced. They are selling units. They're not huge numbers right now, but it's good that there's revenue that's going to be on that side. Based on what Elon tends to do in the past, if the number of units sold isn't material or decent, he tends to just fold it in with other numbers and not say anything about it, which is what I'm expecting him to do with Cybertruck now that it's been introduced. I have a hard time figuring out how he would do that because the CapEx stuff, $9 billion, a lot of that involves the Cybertruck. And so the question mark is, can you justify not including any information about the Cybertruck, given that you now have to place revenue against the CapEx that you did to build that facility? So overall, I think the Cybertruck coming out or coming soon is a plus because now we have a new stream of revenue coming for the company. And now the question is how you can get that to profitability consistent with the rest of Tesla. And Elon indicated that wouldn't happen yet. And so we look forward to it going forward. So overall, I'd have to say, based on all the headwinds we discussed and the fact that the revenue increase targets, for example, with the Cybertruck, we don't see for another year and a half, we're sort of bifurcating between how long-term investors will react to the stock and short-term ones. I believe that if you add up, another element, what we've been showing you, which is, large inventories sitting at the lots that are unsold, I just think that we have a whole bunch of headwinds that are articulated for the company, but not as many, sort of supportive data points. So as a result, my expectation of the quarter is for it to look exactly like the last two. We end up with Tesla coming out with numbers. Hedge funds are unhappy with those numbers. Stock price falls. We wait until the large institutions start talking about what they're thinking about. But I believe that this is why we're getting the reverse sine curve discussion that I've had numerous times. The basis of the long-term growth of the stock tends to be from carefully reviewing the numbers and forecasting sort of where we're going. And there's a lot of bad news that's coming out to the stock in the form of what I just described. So I am expecting us to take our nice dip as we come into production numbers and earnings. And then the long-term folks can get in and buy after that bad news is played out in the marketplace, and they can get a decent price at which to buy the stock compared to what it was at prior to them doing so. So for those of you who are long-term investors, I think keeping the faith makes sense. And this also brings me to my often discussion about the fact that I really think that, I've been saying it, but it looks like the top end of the sine curve that we keep going through is we bounce up to, the mid to late 50s, maybe even into the 260s. And then as we head towards production and earnings numbers, at or before this happens, we drop, 20, 30, 40 points. And then all of a sudden, after we get through that period, we start building the stock price back up again. I'm expecting that to be the case. One of my suggestions, particularly if you have a portfolio greater than 500K, heading for millions, that you definitely think about doing a hedge here because, as we've stated numerous times, if you bought some puts and the stock price fell, you get 10, 20, 30% of your loss returned to you in the form of profits on puts, and you're still holding the stocks, so you didn't have as big a tax burden that was hitting you. If it's in your 401k, obviously not as bad a situation. So in general, though, I believe that all of the data points are supportive of a similar sort of cycle to what we've seen over the last 3 earnings announcements. And I think that this lines up perfectly for that to happen again. Are there outliers that could pop it a lot higher or a lot lower? Absolutely. If, for example, if Dash is announced to be successful in Tampa and expanding to 5 or 10 cities, that's huge because all of a sudden hundreds of Tesla vehicles that are now sitting unsold become, in essence, cabs, and they sort of move from one part of the balance sheet to the other, but in essence, they're sold to their operating unit that's doing cab work. So if Elon came out and said, hey, it's going fine in Tampa, we're going to open up in 20 or 30 US cities over the next year, and then we're going to go to Europe and other parts of the world, now we have an interesting situation because you have all this obvious revenue, but you also have long-term usage revenue going along with these vehicles. You got recurring revenue happening as people pay their fares to get in, and they kind of start going after Uber with electric vehicles. So the picture could change rather dramatically one way or the other because of how much inventory is sitting around and how so many consumers have backed away from electric vehicles to the point where people like Ford and GM, et cetera, either are having problems finishing off their productive capacity, or they don't have enough orders to justify continuing to build these vehicles, especially if they don't have the charging network set up. It just adds up to a picture of industry in a sort of a sideways mode, even if the future is bright mode currently. So I really wanted to just get a quick show out there. The objective was to warn that we're heading into earnings, or I want to say implied earnings, because we get to see the production number and you can sort of extrapolate earnings from that, but you don't get the real number until the end of January. But I think a lot of people have gotten used to how the numbers work on Tesla's balance sheet and how one manages yourself relative to the real earning numbers by getting the production numbers we'll get in a couple of weeks. So I think it's a good time to sort of think through and plan what you're going to do. That way you're prepared with your portfolio and can make a little money if in fact it dips. At any rate, I appreciate you taking time to join us. Just au revoir. Have a great day, and we look forward to any comments you might have. Thanks and goodbye.